A skinny, barefoot 8-year-old girl stops a billionaire on a rainy street, pleading, "Please, my brother can't breathe." He rushes to help, but as he holds the baby, something in the child's face triggers a haunting memory. What he discovers leads to a truth buried deep in his past, and a decision that will rewrite the meaning of family forever. The rain came down hard, hissing against the pavement like static. Monroe Tower stood tall and indifferent against the grey skyline, its mirrored windows catching flashes of passing traffic. A cold wind funneled through the streets, tugging at umbrellas and soaking through collars. Daniel Monroe stepped outside, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him. His umbrella snapped open with a practiced flick of the wrist. His shoes clicked against wet concrete, pace brisk, mind elsewhere. The meeting at the Drake was in 20 minutes, and his assistant had already texted twice to remind him. He scanned the street. No car, no driver. "Derek, where the hell are you?" he muttered, pulling his phone from his coat pocket. One bar. Figures. Then it came. A voice, cutting and small, almost swallowed by the rain. "Sir, my little brother isn't breathing." He turned, more from instinct than intention. Across the sidewalk, standing right on the curb in the pouring rain, was a little girl, about 8 years old, skinny, soaked, and barefoot. Her clothes clung to her like tissue paper, her hair a matted mess across her face. But her voice carried again, stronger now. "Please," Daniel hesitated. The city moved around them. Cars rolled by, people passed, heads down, avoiding eye contact as if on autopilot. The world wasn't built to stop for children in the rain. He didn't move. He wasn't built to stop either. But the girl did something unexpected. She stepped toward him. "My brother," she said, voice raw. "He won't wake up." And then she reached out, small, freezing fingers grasping the sleeve of his coat. Daniel stiffened. The touch was light, but it burned. He looked down at her hand, then at her eyes, clear blue, locked on his. She didn't look frightened. She looked determined, like she'd already been turned away 5 times and wasn't going to accept a 6th. "You need to come with me," she said. "He needs help." He glanced up the street. Still no car, no headlights. "Where is he?" he asked, his tone clipped but quiet. "Down the block, in an alley, behind the corner store." Daniel exhaled through his nose, slowly. This wasn't how his evenings went. He didn't detour. He didn't follow strangers, especially small, dripping ones. He looked at his watch. 10 minutes late already. The meeting could wait. "All right," he said under his breath. "Let's see where this takes me." The girl didn't waste time. She turned and started walking, fast and light, splashing through shallow puddles. Daniel followed, umbrella tilted over both of them. He adjusted his pace to hers without thinking. Long strides shortened to match her quick steps. "What's your name?" he asked. "Fiona," she said without looking back. He nodded to himself. The name fit her somehow, sharp, soft at the edges. "I'm Daniel." "I know," she said. That caught him off guard. "You do?" She shrugged, still walking. "Your face is on the side of your building." He almost smiled at that. They turned the corner and stepped into a narrower street. The rain seemed louder here, echoing against the tight row of old brick buildings. Trash bins lined the alley ahead, their metal lids rattling softly in the wind. Fiona glanced back for the first time, her eyes flicking to Daniel's face like she was checking to see if he disappeared. He met her gaze briefly, and she looked away just as fast, moving ahead again. That quick look, unspoken, almost unconscious, tugged at something in him. She led him past the back of a closed laundromat, then stopped beside a rusted side door. There was no light, no sound, just the whisper of water dripping from a broken pipe nearby. "In here," she said. Daniel hesitated. The alley felt like another world, cut off from the suits and conference calls and market forecasts. It smelled like mildew and oil. His shoes were already soaked. His coat weighed twice as much now. Still, he followed her in. As he stepped through the doorway, the sound of the rain softened behind him, like it had closed a curtain on the rest of the city. He didn't know what he was walking into, but Fiona was already ahead, her shadow slipping down a dark hallway. And for some reason, he kept following. The hallway smelled of damp carpet and something older, something that had settled deep into the walls and didn't plan on leaving. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their flicker barely lighting the narrow path ahead. The air was close, humid from leaking pipes and sealed windows. Fiona moved quickly, as if she'd memorized every creak in the floor. Her feet slapped wetly against the cracked linoleum, but she didn't flinch at the cold or the dark. Daniel followed at a slower pace, eyes adjusting, one hand still gripping the umbrella, though it was useless now. The weight of his wet coat dragged behind him with every step. They passed doors that looked like they hadn't opened in weeks. Paint curled from the edges. One door had a broken doorknob, patched with duct tape and a bent spoon. Another had newspaper stuffed into the gaps at the top to keep the wind out. Daniel had never been in a place like this. Not really. Not where the decay lived in silence, in corners, in the very shape of things. Fiona turned into a room at the end of the hall, pushing the door open with her shoulder. Daniel stepped in after her. The room was small. No windows. A lamp sat on the floor, its bulb dim and yellow. In one corner, a thin mattress lay directly on the ground, a pile of blankets and clothes forming a makeshift nest. And in that nest, curled up and motionless, was a child. Fiona dropped to her knees beside him. "This is Noah," she said softly, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "He's been like this since this morning. He won't wake up." Daniel stood frozen just inside the doorway. The boy, Noah, was impossibly still. His chest rose and fell, barely. A thin rattle in his breath was the only sign he hadn't slipped away completely. Daniel stepped closer, kneeling down beside Fiona. He didn't speak. He wasn't sure he could. The boy was pale, too pale. The kind of pale that didn't come from just being cold. Fiona looked up at him, her face calm in a way that was wrong for her age. "I tried to get help earlier," she said. "No one listened." He believed her. Daniel reached into his coat, pulling off the heavy wool and wrapping it around Noah's small frame. The coat swallowed him whole. Noah didn't react. Daniel slid one arm under the boy's back, the other beneath his knees, and lifted him gently. Noah's head lolled against his chest, his breath whisper-soft against Daniel's neck. Fiona stood quickly. She grabbed a small backpack from the corner and slung it over her shoulder. "I'm coming too," she said, already heading toward the door. Daniel didn't argue. He followed her back into the hallway, his arms tightening instinctively around the boy as they walked. The world outside felt impossibly far away. His phone buzzed somewhere in his pocket. He ignored it. When they reached the street again, the rain was still coming down. Harder, maybe. Fiona shivered beside him, but didn't complain. Daniel shielded Noah as best he could beneath the umbrella, angling his body against the wind. A cab rolled past without slowing. Another turned the corner. Daniel stepped toward the curb, lifted his arm, and flagged one down. The driver hesitated before pulling over, eyeing the trio through the passenger window. Daniel opened the back door, looked at Fiona. "Get in." She climbed in without hesitation, sliding to the far side of the seat. Daniel followed, settling Noah carefully between them, still wrapped in the coat. The driver cleared his throat. "Where to?" "St. Matthew's Medical Center," Daniel said. The driver gave a long look in the mirror, but said nothing, just turned on the meter and pulled away from the curb. The car was quiet. Fiona stared at her brother, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the coat that covered him. Her other hand shook slightly, but she held it still against her lap. Daniel looked out of the window, watched the city smear by lights and rain. He didn't realize until then how tightly he was holding the child. Fiona broke the silence. "Will he be okay?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He turned to her slowly. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but we're not going to wait around and see." Fiona nodded once, then leaned in closer to her brother, her fingers brushing his cheek. Outside, Chicago kept moving, indifferent, endless. Inside the cab, something small and urgent had finally found a place to land. Before we get into the next part, I would love to know what kind of stories you like to read. And please watch the whole story and let me know what you think. If you like my story, please comment number 100 in the comments. The city lights began to thin as the taxi crossed into the outer edges of Chicago. Trees lined the divided avenue like tired sentinels, their branches slick with rain. The streets widened, smoother, quieter, as they entered a neighborhood where windows glowed soft and fences stood tall. The silence inside the cab was heavy. Noah still hadn't stirred. His small body lay slack against Daniel's chest, wrapped in layers of wet wool and heat that didn't seem to reach his skin. Fiona sat with her back straight, hands clenched in her lap, watching her brother's face like it might suddenly disappear. The driver kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Once, he cleared his throat like he might say something, but didn't. His eyes flicked between Daniel's expensive coat, the child nestled in his arms, and the girl whose bare legs stuck out from a too-short dress. Something didn't add up, and he didn't try to hide it. Fiona noticed, too. She turned her head slightly toward Daniel. "You're going to help him, right?" Daniel looked down at Noah, his gaze tracing the boy's tiny nose, his damp lashes stuck together, the faint curl of his lip. There was something about the shape of his cheekbones. Rounder, yes, but familiar. The resemblance wasn't exact. It was something smaller, something quiet. "I am," Daniel said. She didn't respond, just shifted closer, her shoulder brushing lightly against his. They drove another few minutes in silence. The driver took a left at the wrought iron gates, which opened slowly at the buzz of Daniel's code. The cab rolled down a private lane lined with trimmed hedges and black lampposts. Rain bounced off the hood as they approached a large brick house set back from the street. When the car stopped in front of the wide stone steps, Fiona leaned forward, peering out the window. "Is this your house?" Daniel nodded. Fiona's brows drew together slightly, but she said nothing. Daniel opened the door, lifting Noah with practiced care. Fiona followed, stepping gingerly onto the wet driveway, her sneakers squelching as she moved. The cab pulled away slowly, the driver giving one last glance, before disappearing back into the rain. Daniel led them up the steps, shifting Noah's weight in his arms as he reached for the keypad beside the heavy oak door. The lock clicked. The door opened from the inside. Mrs. Jenkins stood in the entryway, her grey hair pulled into its usual tight bun, her glasses slipping halfway down her nose. She was holding a folded towel, clearly in the middle of something mundane. She stopped cold at the sight of them. "Mr. Munro," she said carefully, her eyes flicking from his soaked coat to the child in his arms, then to Fiona, drenched, silent, half hidden behind his leg. "What on earth? Call Dr. Harris," Daniel said, walking past her, not slowing. "Now. He needs to be seen immediately." She turned as he passed. "Yes, of course. I'll call right away." Fiona stepped into the foyer behind them, her shoes leaving wet prints on the marble. Her eyes moved slowly across the space. The high ceiling, the winding staircase, the chandelier dripping light onto the polished floor. She stayed close to the door. Daniel carried Noah into the living room, gently laying him on the wide couch near the fireplace. He knelt beside him, adjusting the coat, checking his pulse the way he remembered from years ago. The boy's breathing was shallow, but it was there. "Do you have a blanket?" he asked without turning. Mrs. Jenkins appeared almost instantly with a thick, cream-colored one from the linen closet. Daniel took it without a word and began wrapping Noah with slow, deliberate movements. Fiona hovered at the threshold, her hands twisted together at her waist. She didn't look afraid, just unsure, like someone stepping into a room they weren't sure they were allowed to be in. "You can come closer," Daniel said quietly. She hesitated, then crossed the room, stopping beside the couch. Daniel looked up at her. "He's still breathing. That's good." Fiona didn't smile. She knelt beside the couch and touched her brother's hand. "He's never been sick like this." Daniel nodded. "Dr. Harris will be here soon. He's the best." Mrs. Jenkins appeared again, this time with a tray, hot tea, 2 towels, a stack of clothes that might fit Fiona. She paused beside Daniel, lowering her voice. "What happened?" "I don't know all of it," Daniel said, "but he needs help. So does she." Mrs. Jenkins gave a small nod and turned toward Fiona. "Sweetheart, why don't we get you dry and warm while the doctor sees your brother?" Fiona didn't move. Her fingers clung to Noah's hand. "I'll stay with him," Daniel said gently. "I promise." Fiona looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the alley. She seemed to search his face, hunting for something, maybe a crack, maybe a lie. Whatever she found there must have been enough. She rose slowly and followed Mrs. Jenkins down the hall. Daniel sat back on his heels, staring at the boy. The blanket rose and fell, fragile as tissue. Somewhere behind his ribs, something twisted. It had been years since he'd held a child. Years since he'd said the name Dylan out loud. But looking at Noah now, in the glow of the firelight, it felt like something long buried had begun to surface. And Daniel wasn't sure he was ready to face it. A low fire crackled in the hearth, casting soft orange flickers onto the polished wood floor. The mansion felt still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the tall windows, now muffled by heavy curtains drawn tight. Daniel sat in the same place he'd been for over an hour, elbows on knees, eyes on the boy lying wrapped in the cream-colored blanket. Noah hadn't moved. His breathing was shallow, but present. Each rise of his chest, though faint, gave Daniel reason not to call for worse news. Footsteps echoed gently from the hallway. Dr. Harris entered, a tall man with sleeves rolled to the elbow, his medical bag already open. "Noah, age?" he asked. "Just turned 1. Fiona's voice came from the doorway. She stepped into the room, now dry, wearing a sweatshirt that hung a little too big and socks that bunched around her ankles. Her hair was combed, but still damp, curling slightly at the ends. Dr. Harris knelt beside the couch and began his exam without ceremony. Stethoscope, pulse, eyes, breath. Daniel stood quietly nearby, arms crossed. He hadn't said much since letting Fiona return to the room, and she hadn't asked for more. The doctor pressed the stethoscope against Noah's chest, frowning slightly. "Pneumonia," he said. "Early stage, but his lungs are tight, likely caused by prolonged exposure to cold and damp. He's also dehydrated, severely." Fiona flinched, just slightly, enough for Daniel to notice. "Will he be okay?" she asked. "With fluids and antibiotics," Dr. Harris said, already prepping a syringe. He was lucky. A few more days in those conditions. Daniel swallowed. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Harris worked efficiently, inserting an IV line into the back of Noah's hand, and securing it with a small strip of tape. Fiona watched every movement, not with fear, but with a kind of still concentration that didn't belong to someone her age. "He'll sleep a lot," the doctor said, straightening. "That's a good thing. His body needs to rest." Fiona nodded, but didn't move from her spot beside the couch. She sat down slowly on the floor, crossing her legs, folding her arms across her stomach. Dr. Harris turned to Daniel. "Keep him warm, hydrated. Call me if he worsens or spikes a fever." "Thank you," Daniel said. The doctor nodded once, packed up his things, and left without another word. The room fell into silence again. Fiona leaned closer to her brother and whispered something Daniel couldn't hear. Her fingers brushed Noah's blanket back into place. She tucked it just so under his chin, like she'd done it 100 times. "Would you like something to eat?" Daniel asked gently, his voice lower now, more tentative. Fiona shook her head without looking up. "I'm not hungry." Daniel watched her for a long moment. The girl looked small and older than she should all at once. He remembered Dylan at that age, barely 7, with his mop of black hair and crooked smile. The image arrived uninvited, bringing with it a familiar ache. "You need to eat," he said, walking to the sideboard where Mrs. Jenkins had left a small tray. "To stay strong for him." Fiona didn't answer. She just stayed there, one hand on her brother's foot through the blanket. Daniel returned a moment later, crouching beside her. In his hand was a bowl of soup, steam curling up, carrying the scent of roasted vegetables and something warm and earthy. A piece of fresh bread rested on the edge of the plate. "It's for you," he said, placing it gently on the low table next to the couch. "Noah wouldn't want you getting sick too." Fiona's stomach betrayed her, growling loud enough that she winced. Daniel pretended not to notice. After a long pause, she reached for the spoon. She didn't thank him, didn't look at him. She just took one small bite, then another. Her hands shook slightly as she ate. Mrs. Jenkins entered quietly, holding a folded blanket. "She'll need somewhere to sleep tonight," she said softly to Daniel. "I'll set up the guest room next to mine," he replied, eyes still on Fiona. "And get the heater turned on in there." Mrs. Jenkins nodded and disappeared again. Fiona finished the soup slowly. When the bowl was empty, she set it back on the tray and wiped her mouth with her sleeve. She didn't speak. "Do you want to lie down?" Daniel asked. She shook her head. "I'll stay with him." Daniel nodded, then pulled one of the armchairs closer to the couch. He sat, resting his elbows on his knees, matching her posture. The fire popped once in the silence. "You've been taking care of him alone?" he asked after a while. She nodded. "Since my mum died." Daniel exhaled softly. He didn't ask how long that had been. He didn't need to. Fiona looked over at him. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "I had to grow up fast." Daniel didn't say, "You shouldn't have had to." She'd heard it before, probably, from people who meant well and left anyway. Instead, he just said, "You're doing a good job." Fiona blinked. It was the first compliment she'd heard in months, maybe years. She turned back to Noah, brushing her fingers along his forehead. Daniel watched the two of them, so small on that wide leather couch, dwarfed by the room's size and its silence. No child should carry this weight, he thought. But she had. And she still was. The house had settled into its nighttime hush. The rain had softened to a drizzle, ticking faintly against the tall windows, and the fire in the living room had long since faded to glowing embers. Somewhere upstairs, a grandfather clock chimed quietly. 2 long, hollow tones. Daniel stood in the hallway outside his office, hand resting on the doorknob. He hadn't been in that room in months, maybe longer. The thought of it used to feel unbearable, like pressing on a bruise that never healed. But something had shifted tonight. Maybe it was the way Fiona's eyes had stayed on her brother for hours, or how she hadn't cried once, even as exhaustion set in. Maybe it was the memory of Dylan, surfacing uninvited in the curve of Noah's cheek. He opened the door. The office smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Books lined the far wall, spines straight and untouched. His desk sat in its usual order, pens, folders, 2 framed certificates. Nothing personal, nothing vulnerable, except the drawer. He walked over slowly, sat down, and opened the bottom right compartment. Inside, beneath a few faded documents, was a small wooden box. Smooth, dark oak, the edges worn just slightly by time and handling. Daniel lifted it gently, setting it on the desk like something sacred. He hesitated, then opened the lid. Inside, a plastic toy watch, its face scratched and faded. A crumpled drawing, colored in with wild, messy strokes, depicting a man with a cape and "Number 1 Dad" scrawled in shaky block letters. A soccer medal on a fraying ribbon, and a photograph. The photo was the kind that shouldn't have meant much, grainy, off-center, caught in the morning light on their front porch. Dylan had his arms wrapped around Daniel's waist, grinning wide, 2 front teeth missing. Daniel remembered the way the boy had run out, shoelaces untied, insisting they take one more picture before he left for work. He'd said yes, reluctantly. He'd already been late. Daniel picked up the photo, held it with both hands. His thumbs trembled. "I'm sorry, champ," he whispered. "I should have been there." He sat in silence, just holding it. And then, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he cried. It wasn't the clean, quiet kind. It came from somewhere deep, raw, unexpected. His shoulders shook, his chest heaved. The sound of it filled the room, cracked open something old. He didn't hear the door creak open, didn't see the small figure standing in the doorway, barefoot in borrowed pajamas, a glass of water forgotten in her hand. Fiona didn't say anything at first. She just watched. Daniel, the man who had barked instructions to his assistant on the phone and moved through the world like everything could be controlled, now hunched over his desk, weeping into a photograph. She walked in quietly, setting the glass down on a side table. "My mum used to say," she began, voice soft, "when people we love go to heaven, they become angels. I talk to her every night." Daniel turned, startled. He wiped at his face quickly, but he didn't try to hide the tears. "I haven't spoken to him," he said, voice hoarse. "Not once, since the accident." Fiona stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the rug. "It's hard at first," she said, "but it helps. When I talk to my mum, it feels like she's listening." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. There was no pity in her expression, just understanding, a strange, quiet knowing no child should have. He nodded once, as if to say he'd try. Fiona reached out, her small hand resting gently on his shoulder. The contact startled him, not in its boldness, but in its simplicity. It wasn't meant to fix anything. It was just there, steady. Daniel didn't speak, but after a moment, he raised his hand and placed it over hers. Not tightly, just enough to say he felt it. He saw her. They stayed like that, in silence. A man who had lost too much, and a child who had carried more than she should. The photo still rested between them on the desk. And in the quiet, something like healing began. The hospital corridor was dim, its overhead lights humming softly, as if trying not to disturb the silence. The air smelled of antiseptic and worn leather chairs, of coffee left too long on warming plates. Outside the window, dawn threatened the edge of the night, bleeding into the sky in shades of faint blue. That morning, Daniel had found Fiona burning up, her small frame curled beneath the blanket in the guest room. She'd refused to wake, her brow slick with sweat, lips cracked with fever. Panic surged through him. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms and rushed her to St. Matthew's Medical Center. Dr. Harris had examined her quickly, eyes tight with concern. "She's in the early stages of severe pneumonia," he'd said. Another day. It could have been worse. Now, Daniel sat outside the ICU, Fiona behind glass, an oxygen tube beneath her nose, her breath shallow but steady. Machines beeped steadily beside her bed. Daniel stared at the floor, his fingers clenched around the paper coffee cup in his hands. "Not again," he murmured. "I won't lose another child." Daniel Munro sat slouched in a molded plastic chair, a laptop open on his knees, its screen casting a faint glow on his tired face. His suit jacket was folded beside him, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up to the elbows. He hadn't left the hospital in 2 days. Not really. Not more than a shower and a change of clothes back at the house. He typed with one hand, barely glancing at the words. His other hand rested on a coffee cup, long gone cold. Fiona was still in the pediatric ICU, unconscious, but stable. Mrs. Jenkins had brought her pajamas, a toothbrush, and her favorite book from the house. That was yesterday. Maybe the day before. Daniel had stopped keeping track. His phone buzzed beside him. Karen. He sighed, closed the laptop halfway, and picked up the call. "Daniel," her voice came sharp, crisp as always. "The board is concerned." He closed his eyes briefly. "Of course they are. You've missed every executive meeting this week. There's a call with Tokyo in 3 hours, he cut in. "I know. Investors are asking questions. The press is circling. The Value project is stalling because no one knows where you are." "I'm at the hospital," Daniel said, his voice even. "I've been here for 2 nights." "I know. That's why I called." He rubbed his eyes. "Tell them I'm attending to something more important." There was a pause. Then, softer. "Is it the girl?" "Yes?" "Daniel." Her tone changed, less professional now. "You've always been able to compartmentalize. What's going on?" Daniel looked through the ICU window toward Fiona's bed. Through the small glass pane, he could see her stillness, lit by the pale light of a monitoring machine. Her hands were curled slightly at her sides, her chest rising and falling with effort. "I stopped compartmentalizing the night I buried my son," he said, "and maybe I shouldn't have waited so long." Karen didn't respond. She didn't need to. "I'll be in touch when I can," he added, then ended the call. A nurse passed by and nodded. Daniel gave a faint one back. He stood and stretched, his back popping with fatigue, then made his way to the small waiting area's vending machine. The machine blinked at him. He ignored it. In one of the chairs sat an older man with a crumpled coat, his cane resting against his knee. His eyes were tired in a way Daniel recognized. The kind of tired that comes from waiting for news you can't control. Daniel nodded politely as he passed. "You sleeping here too?" the man asked. Daniel turned. "Seems like it." The man chuckled softly. "Pediatric floor's always the quietest and the loudest at the same time. I lost my girl here, long time ago." Daniel hesitated. "I lost my son. Different hospital." "Sorry to hear that." "Thanks." They sat in silence for a while. Then the man added, "You here for the girl?" Daniel nodded. "She yours?" A pause. Then, "Not by blood." The man gave a slow nod, like he understood that more than words could explain. "Doesn't matter. Blood's just biology. Love's what sticks." Daniel didn't reply. He didn't need to. Before he returned to Fiona's room, his phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Mrs. Jenkins. "She left the house earlier to pick something up. She hasn't come back yet. I thought she'd be quick." Daniel stared at the screen, confusion sharpening into concern. She went alone. His feet moved before the thought fully settled. He strode back toward the pediatric wing, stopping at the doorway. Fiona was still there, of course. He remembered now. It was Noah, who had been brought home earlier with Mrs. Jenkins. Daniel stepped inside, scanned the room. Her monitor beeped steadily. An IV bag dripped slowly. He sat down beside her, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her forehead. "You're doing so well," he whispered. "Just hang in there." He didn't hear the elevator door open. Claire, his ex-wife, stood in a tailored coat, her eyes lined with worry. She looked as out of place here as he had his first night, still poised, still unreadable. "Karen called me," she said. "Of course she did." "She said she doesn't recognize you anymore." Daniel gave a soft laugh, humorless. "Neither do I." Claire hesitated. "I had to see it for myself." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you here because you care about me, or just worried about the company?" The question hung in the air, too long. She didn't answer right away. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe both." Danielle nodded, lips tight. "That sounds about right." Claire looked past him, into the room. She softened at the sight of Fiona's still figure. "She looks small." "She is." Claire glanced back at him. "You're staying?" "I am." She studied his face for a long moment. "You used to run when things got hard." "I know. I never thought you'd come back for anything." Daniel looked toward the ICU window. "I didn't. They came to me." She gave a slow nod. "Maybe that's the only way we ever change." He didn't disagree. In the silence, he suddenly realized something was different. Not in the hospital, not in Claire, in him. He was no longer a man trying to fix the past. He was becoming a man who stays. 1 week later, Fiona was discharged and returned home to the Munro estate. Though her frame was still fragile, her color had returned, and she walked slowly through the front doors like someone stepping into familiar ground after a long journey. Mrs. Jenkins had her room, freshly made with lavender sheets and a small note on the pillow. "Welcome home." Claire began visiting more often, sometimes staying for hours to help Fiona with schoolwork. She brought books, old teacher's guides, and once even showed up with cupcakes just because. The house felt fuller, not just in sound, but in presence. Fiona smiled more, and Daniel, though quiet, watched it all unfold like someone afraid to blink in case it vanished. The sun filtered through the tall windows of the Munro estate, casting soft light across polished floors and freshly opened curtains. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the morning quiet and clean, like the world had been wiped down overnight. Birds chirped somewhere near the hedges, cautious, as if still unsure if it was safe to return. Fiona sat at the long dining table, a pencil in hand, chewing lightly on its eraser. Her notebook was open in front of her, blank, except for a few words she kept erasing and rewriting. Across from her, Claire sipped coffee and flipped through a book of writing prompts. It was their second session this week. "You don't have to start from the beginning," Claire said gently, not looking up. "Sometimes it's easier to begin with what feels true today." Fiona considered that. Her gaze drifted toward the large window, where she could see Noah in the garden with Mrs. Jenkins, toddling unevenly across the grass. He was stronger now, less pale, more curious again. Watching him, Fiona felt something unfamiliar rise up in her chest. "I guess I could try," she said, and lowered her pencil to the page. Daniel stood in his study, flipping through a folder of reports he hadn't really read. His eyes were tired, his mind elsewhere. He heard the door open behind him. Mrs. Jenkins's voice called softly, "She left this on the table. Thought you'd want to see it." She handed him a single sheet of notebook paper. A heading at the top read, What family means to me. Daniel read slowly. It used to be just Noah and me. Sometimes it was scary. Mostly it was quiet. Then we met Mr. Daniel. He's serious, but sometimes smiles when he thinks I'm not looking. Now we live in a big house. There are rooms I've never been in. There's soup when we're sick, and warm blankets. I don't know if we're a real family, but we're not scared anymore. Daniel didn't sit down. He just stood there, the page in his hand, the room very still around him. That last line played again in his mind. But we're not scared anymore. He folded the page carefully, placed it on the desk, and walked out. Later that afternoon, Fiona found Mrs. Jenkins in the kitchen folding towels. Do you think Mr. Daniel would mind if I called him something else? She asked quietly. Mrs. Jenkins looked up, surprised. Like what? Fiona hesitated. Dad, maybe, but I'm not sure yet. The old woman smiled gently and went back to folding. I think he'd be okay with waiting until you are. That evening, they ate dinner together at the long dining table. No laptops, no trays in separate rooms, no rushing. Daniel had set 2 extra places himself, awkwardly but intentionally, one for Fiona, one for Noah, who was now seated in a high chair, looking more interested in throwing peas than eating them. Fiona sat stiffly at first, watching him. Daniel cleared his throat. We used to sit here every Sunday, he said. Back when... He stopped, looked at her. Back when there was just me and Dylan. Fiona didn't speak. She reached over, helped Noah hold his spoon. Daniel nodded to himself. I thought maybe we could try bringing it back. Not every Sunday. Just, tonight. She met his eyes for a second and gave the smallest nod. After dinner, Noah was curled up on the couch, watching cartoons with half-closed eyes. Fiona sat nearby with her notebook again, legs tucked under her. Daniel stepped into the room, holding a small cup of cocoa. He sat beside her and handed it over. I read your essay, he said quietly. Her cheeks flushed. Mrs. Jenkins wasn't supposed to show it. I'm glad she did. There was a pause. I meant what I said, Fiona said, eyes on her cup. I don't know if this is a real family yet. I don't even know what that means. Daniel leaned back slightly, his voice calm. Neither do I. But I know this house is yours now. You and Noah, you have a home here. Always. She nodded slowly. Thanks. After a moment, she looked back at him. You still miss him, don't you? Your son. Daniel's breath caught for just a second. Every day, he said. Fiona was quiet for a beat, then said, I think he'd be proud of you. Daniel looked at her. That makes one of us, he said, but his voice cracked a little. Fiona didn't respond. She just leaned slightly closer, enough that their shoulders touched. They watched Noah together, neither needing to say more. In the quiet, the word family began to mean something again. Not perfect, not finished, but enough. The buildings on the south end were low and tired, their brick faces darkened by years of soot and weather. Faded curtains hung limp behind window panes, and rusted mailboxes overflowed with flyers that no one seemed to claim. The street was quiet, except for the wind tugging plastic bags along the sidewalk, like ghosts looking for a place to land. Daniel adjusted the collar of his coat and knocked again. The screen door rattled softly as he stepped back. The porch creaked behind him, and the air smelled of wet concrete and old cooking oil. He glanced up at the peeling paint on the awning above the door, Unit 4B, and wondered, not for the first time, what exactly he was doing here. The door opened a crack. A weathered eye peeked out, narrowing beneath a brow creased from decades of disapproval. Ms. Turner? Daniel asked. Ruth Turner didn't answer. She just stared at him. I'm Daniel Monroe, he added. I know who you are. she said, and opened the door wider, only enough to block his way. Took you long enough. He gave a slow nod. I was hoping we could talk. You think showing up in a $1,000 coat makes it easier? I didn't come for easy. She looked him up and down. Number U came because guilt always shows up late. He didn't argue. After a long pause, she opened the door all the way. 5 minutes. Inside, the apartment was small and dim. The furniture looked second-hand, but clean. Photographs cluttered a shelf, most in mismatched frames, people smiling in soft light. Ruth moved with a slow limp, her left leg dragging slightly as she pointed to a chair by the table. Daniel sat. She stayed standing, arms crossed. So, why are you here? I'm trying to understand, he said. Lisa. She never talked about me. I never knew her. But Fiona and Noah are hers, Ruth cut in. Not yours. Daniel nodded. I know, but I'm trying to do right by them. She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Now you are. Why would someone like you care about kids like them? Daniel looked down at his hands. I've lost a lot, he said softly, including who I used to be. Maybe by helping them, I can forgive myself. Silence. Then a voice from the other room. You talking about Lisa? An older man entered slowly, resting one hand on the doorway. He was thin, with tufts of grey hair and a gentle, rasping voice. That's Cal, Ruth muttered. He lived downstairs, used to carry Noah up the stairs when Lisa was too tired. Daniel stood politely. Cal waved it off. She was a good one, Cal said, eyes distant. Worked 3 jobs. Sang lullabies to those kids even when her feet bled. Never asked for nothing. Ruth sighed. Except once, when the eviction notice came. Daniel turned. She tried to talk to someone. She walked all the way downtown, Ruth said, voice tight. Wanted to speak to the people behind the project that bought the building. Thought maybe, just maybe, someone would see her face, and not just a name on paper. They didn't even let her in. Daniel swallowed hard. That was my company. Ruth's eyes locked on his. And now, you're here. He nodded. You think you can make that right with a few warm blankets and soup? No, he said. I don't. But I can start by not looking away this time. Ruth watched him for a long moment. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared into the hallway. Cal eased down into a chair. She's got a sharp tongue, but a big heart. Lisa was like a daughter to her. Daniel nodded slowly. Did Lisa ever talk about leaving something behind? Cal tilted his head. Only once. Gave Ruth a box. Told her if anything happened, it should go to the kids. Moments later, Ruth returned with a worn shoebox wrapped in plastic. She held it out, still hesitating. She packed this when she knew she wouldn't make it, she said. Didn't have much. But what she did have, she wanted her kids to remember. Daniel took the box with both hands, carefully. The weight of it felt heavier than it should. Thank you, he said. She didn't leave it for you, Ruth replied. She left it for them. Don't forget that. He nodded, chest tight. Inside, through the fogged plastic, he could see old photos, a folded scarf, and something that looked like a child's drawing. And, at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with faded ink. On the front, for whoever loves my children next. Ruth saw his eyes pause there. Her voice dropped to something gentler. She never gave up on them, even when she had nothing left to give. Daniel held the box to his chest, unsure if he had the strength to open it yet. I'll take care of them, he said quietly. Ruth didn't respond right away. Then she stepped aside toward the door. Make sure you do, because if you don't, someone like me always remembers. Outside, the wind had picked up again, tossing old leaves across the street. Daniel stepped back onto the cracked sidewalk, the box pressed firmly under his arm. He felt like he was carrying something that mattered. The air in Ruth Turner's apartment held the smell of dust and something floral, old potpourri maybe, forgotten in a dish by the window. Light filtered through gauzy curtains, weak and yellow, falling in stripes across the worn carpet. The silence felt thick, like the walls themselves remembered too much and didn't know how to let it go. Daniel sat at the table with the shoebox unopened in front of him. Ruth hovered by the counter, her back turned, rinsing out 2 mugs that neither of them had asked for. She hadn't said anything since she handed him the box. Maybe she was waiting for him to speak first. Maybe she was waiting to see if he would even open it. He did. The tape peeled away reluctantly, like it didn't want to let go. Inside were a few neatly folded items. A knit scarf with a loose thread near the end, a photograph of Fiona holding baby Noah on her lap, both of them laughing, a birthday card with glittered edges, a pressed flower wrapped in tissue, and at the bottom, the letter. He held it with both hands. The envelope was creased at the corners, the ink slightly smudged. It read, "For whoever loves my children next." Daniel opened it slowly. Inside, Lisa's handwriting was careful, almost formal. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I wish I could be there to explain everything myself. But life didn't work out that way for me. My kids, Fiona and Noah, are the best parts of me. Please, don't see them as something broken you need to fix. Love them like they're already whole. Because they are. And maybe, if you can, remind them that I was more than just tired. I was trying. I hope you're someone who knows how to stay." Lisa Daniel let the paper fall gently to the table. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just sat there, eyes stinging, heart aching. Ruth turned finally, drying her hands on a threadbare towel. She watched him for a long moment, then crossed the room and placed an old photograph in front of him. It was Lisa, much younger, smiling at the camera. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was wearing a diner apron with a smudge of flour on the collar. She was 22 in that photo, Ruth said. Still thought hard work would fix everything. Daniel traced the edge of the picture with one finger. "She looks like Fiona." "She had that same fire," Ruth nodded. "Same quiet stubbornness. Wouldn't ask for help even when she needed it most." "Why didn't she ever come back?" Daniel asked. "Try again?" Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You mean after your company threw her out of the lobby?" Daniel looked up, guilt flaring in his chest. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't even see her," Ruth finished for him. "That's the whole problem, isn't it? People like her don't get seen by people like you." He didn't argue. Couldn't. "She came home that day with her shoes soaked through," Ruth said, voice quieter now. "Didn't cry. Just took off her coat, checked on the kids, and went right back to work that night. Cleaning floors at the motel." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table, head bowed. "She came, and I never knew. That project was mine." Ruth studied him for a moment. "And now?" "I don't know," he said. "Now I can't stop thinking about how many others we didn't see. How many Lisa Turners we let fall through the cracks." There was a knock at the door. Ruth moved to open it. On the other side stood a girl, 16 maybe, with a backpack and a bag of groceries in her arms. Her eyes widened when she saw Daniel. "Sorry," she said quickly. "Didn't know you had company." "It's all right, baby," Ruth said. "This is Natalie. Her mum works 2 jobs. Lisa used to babysit her when she was little." Daniel turned. "You knew her?" Natalie nodded. "She taught me how to tie my shoes, and she always packed an extra sandwich for lunch. Said it was just in case I got extra hungry." She smiled faintly. "I always got extra hungry." Daniel swallowed. Ruth gave the girl a quick hug, took the groceries, then closed the door again. She didn't just love her kids, Ruth said. She loved every kid who needed someone. Daniel nodded slowly. And no one ever loved her back the way she deserved. Ruth met his eyes. Then maybe it's time someone did, even if it's too late. He looked back down at the letter. Love them like they're already whole. He stood, carefully folding the paper, tucking it back into the envelope. I'm going to tell them, he said. Fiona, Noah, everything. Ruth gave a quiet hum of approval. They deserve to know who their mother really was. I don't know what they'll think of me when they do. That's not the point, she said. They don't need you to be perfect, just honest. Daniel nodded. He picked up the box. Heavier now, not with weight, but with meaning. Outside, the clouds had begun to lift. The streets were still wet, but there was a faint golden light breaking through the grey. Before he stepped out, he turned to Ruth. Thank you, he said, for not throwing me out. She raised an eyebrow. Don't thank me yet. I'm still watching. He smiled for hours. Good. And with that, he stepped back into the world, one step closer to the truth. The late afternoon sun stretched across the Munro estate, its golden light slipping through tall windows and pooling quietly on hardwood floors. Outside, the garden bloomed in early spring colors, soft violets and sleepy daffodils. Birds fluttered through the hedges, while the scent of fresh soil drifted in with the breeze. Daniel was in the living room, kneeling on the rug, helping Noah stack wooden blocks into a crooked tower. Noah, now steadier on his feet, babbled to himself as he picked up another red block and placed it at the very top, only for the tower to sway and tumble. The boy shrieked with laughter. "Da-da!" he giggled, reaching for Daniel's sleeve. "Uh-oh!" Daniel froze. He looked at Noah, wide-eyed, smiling, unaware of what he'd just said. Across the room, Mrs. Jenkins paused mid-step, holding a folded blanket. Her mouth curved into a knowing smile. "I think," she said gently, "he just claimed you." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but didn't. Instead, he reached for the blocks again, resetting the base. "Let's build it higher this time, champ." From the hallway, Fiona's voice called out, "Mr. Daniel, are we still going to the library?" "In 5 minutes," he replied. They drove with the windows slightly cracked, letting in the breeze. Fiona sat in the front seat beside him, her backpack nestled between her knees. She didn't speak much, just hummed softly as she watched the trees pass. Noah slept in the car seat behind them, his head tilted to one side, mouth open in complete trust. Daniel glanced at Fiona. "You've been quiet today." "I'm thinking," she said. "About what?" She shrugged. "School. Mum, stuff." He waited. After a long moment, she asked, "Did you really read the whole letter?" "Yes." A beat. Then, "Did it make you sad?" Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "Yes, and grateful, and ashamed." Fiona turned toward him, studying his profile. "You didn't know that she came to your office?" "No," he said quietly. "I didn't. But that doesn't change the fact that I built the thing that pushed her out." There was silence between them, thick but not uncomfortable. "I'm glad she left us the letter," Fiona said. "Me too." That evening, Daniel sat at the edge of Fiona's desk in the study room while she scribbled something in a spiral notebook. A stack of worksheets was neatly arranged beside her, and a copy of Bridge to Terabithia lay open-faced on the desk. She scratched something out and muttered, "Ugh. Math is dumb." "Careful," Daniel smirked. "You're talking to someone who built half his empire with numbers." "That explains a lot," she shot back, but her lips twitched in the beginning of a smile. Claire had dropped off a binder from Fiona's school earlier that day, a list of upcoming events, permission slips, and a notice about the upcoming parent-teacher meeting. Daniel had already marked the calendar. As Fiona worked, he took a seat across from her and pulled out the folder. "I talked to your teacher yesterday," he said. "She says you've been doing well. Quiet, but focused." Fiona didn't look up. "She talks a lot. She also said you've started to laugh more." That made her glance up. "She did?" Daniel nodded. "She said she notices a difference." Fiona looked down at her paper again. Her pencil tapped against the page. "It's easier to laugh now." After dinner, they sat on the front porch, the three of them, Noah on Daniel's lap, clutching a plush elephant. Fiona curled on the porch swing, hugging her knees. The evening air was cool but soft, brushing gently against their faces. Daniel told them about Dylan for the first time, about the way he used to race around the house in a cape, convinced he could fly. About the time he tried to make invisible pancakes and served them on empty plates. Fiona laughed quietly, eyes focused on the fading sky. "Do you think," she asked softly, "he would have liked me?" Daniel looked at her. "He would have loved you." She nodded but didn't say anything. Noah dozed off in his arms, fingers still gripping the elephant's ear. Later, after tucking Noah into bed, Daniel walked Fiona to her room. She paused outside the door, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Good night, Uncle Daniel," she said out of habit, then froze. "I mean, Mr. Daniel." He didn't flinch. He crouched to her level, his voice steady, low. "If you want, you can call me Dad." Fiona's lips parted slightly, as if to say something, but no words came. Her eyes welled up, and she looked down quickly, blinking hard. There was a long moment of stillness. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just reached out and wrapped her arms around him, tightly, without hesitation. Daniel held her, one hand resting lightly on the back of her head, the other around her shoulders. When she finally stepped back, her eyes were red, but she was smiling. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night, sweetheart." She turned and went into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Daniel stood in the hallway for a while, unmoving. Then he leaned against the wall, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The house was quiet, but in that quiet, he no longer felt like a guest. He felt like he belonged, like maybe finally he had come home. The sky outside the courthouse had been a clear, late spring blue, with just enough wind to rustle the pages of the file Daniel carried under his arm. The steps to the building were warm underfoot, and Fiona's hand rested quietly in his as they walked up together. Noah toddled ahead, his soft-soled shoes tapping gently on the concrete, giggling each time the wind chased his hair. The night before, Daniel had knocked softly on Fiona's bedroom door. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, sketching something in her notebook under the glow of her desk lamp. She looked up, blinking. "Can I come in?" he asked. She nodded. He stepped inside, unsure how to begin. He wasn't good at speeches, not with her. With her, everything needed to be honest. "Director." "I've been thinking about something," he said, lowering himself onto the edge of the bed. "And I want to ask you first, because none of this works if it isn't what you want to." Fiona put her pencil down, her eyes focused on him. "I want to adopt you," he said gently. "You and Noah. I want to make it official. No more wondering, no more what-ifs, just family. What do you think?" Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He continued. "I've already started the paperwork. Everything's ready. But if you say no, or if it feels wrong..." Fiona interrupted by climbing into his arms. Her hug said everything. The next morning, the paperwork was signed. The judge, a grey-haired woman with kind eyes, smiled as she stamped the final page. Fiona sat beside Daniel, her legs barely swinging above the floor, and Noah bounced on Mrs. Jenkins' knee at the back of the room. Claire was there too, her presence quiet but supportive. When the judge leaned over her bench and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Monroe," Daniel looked at Fiona, and she smiled wide and unguarded. They were a family. Finally. A year passed. The morning sun fell gently through the glass doors that opened onto the back garden. Balloons bobbed lazily in the breeze, tied to the iron fence posts. A folding table had been dressed in soft blue and cream linens, dotted with cupcakes, paper crowns, and a handmade sign that read, "Happy 2nd birthday, Noah." The air smelled faintly of lemon frosting and lilacs from the garden hedge. Daniel stood near the grill, wearing an apron that read, "Chef in Progress," a gift from Fiona the week before. The cake sat awkwardly on the counter beside him, his third attempt, slightly uneven, but proudly homemade. Mrs. Jenkins hovered with a spatula, clearly tempted to take over, but respectfully staying back. "Not bad for your first real cake," she said, peering at the thick swirl of frosting. Daniel wiped his hands with a dish towel. "He's only 2. He won't know it's lopsided." "He'll know it was made by someone who cares," she said gently. "That counts more." He nodded, eyes drifting across the yard where Claire had just arrived, with a wrapped box and a gentle smile. She wore a light coat and sunglasses, but removed both as Fiona raced up to greet her. "I'm glad you could come," Fiona said. Claire crouched to hug her. "Wouldn't miss it. I even brought something special." She handed over a small, soft-wrapped bundle. "What is it?" Claire knelt to Noah's level, brushing a lock of his hair. "It belonged to Dylan. A onesie. He only wore it once. I thought maybe your brother could wear it on special days, if that's all right." Fiona blinked, then nodded. "That's more than all right." Claire's eyes shifted to Daniel across the lawn. She raised a hand in greeting. He lifted his glass of lemonade in return. Guests were few, just family, and those who felt like it. Natalie came, carrying a handmade kite, with Fiona's name painted in looping script across its wings. Ruth Turner sent a bouquet of bright wildflowers with a card that read, "For Lisa's joy. May it keep blooming." Noah toddled around in a paper crown, chasing bubbles, while Fiona supervised with the serious patience of someone twice her age. She wore a yellow sundress, hair loosely braided, her arms marked faintly with paint from a school project she hadn't wanted to wash off yet. Daniel pulled out his phone and took a picture. Noah mid-laugh, Fiona leaning forward with her hands on her knees, the light perfect and unposed. For a moment, he didn't feel like he was holding on to someone else's family. He felt like it was his. After cake and before presents, Fiona stepped forward with something tucked behind her back. "I made something," she said. "For Noah, but also for you." Everyone quieted. Even the breeze seemed to pause. She handed over a piece of poster board, slightly wrinkled at the corners, but bursting with color. Rayon lines and colored pencil shaded 5 figures standing beneath a big blue sky. 1 tall, 3 medium, 1 small. Above them, bold, uneven letters read, "My Family." Claire, Mrs. Jenkins, and Daniel stood to one side of the tallest figure. Fiona and Noah stood on the other. All of them were smiling, and floating just above, almost like a balloon, was a little winged figure in a cape. Daniel swallowed. "This is beautiful," he said. Fiona's voice was soft. "That's Dylan in the sky. I didn't want to leave him out." He looked at her, and something in his chest folded inward. "I think he'd like that," he said. Fiona shifted, uncertain. "Is it okay?" Daniel crouched to her eye level, holding the picture in both hands like it was something sacred. "It's more than okay," he said. "It's everything." She nodded, then, almost shyly, leaned in and hugged him around the neck. Behind them, Mrs. Jenkins wiped her eyes. Claire took Noah's hand and whispered something that made the boy giggle. Later that night, after the house had quieted, Daniel sat in his study. The party had been cleaned up, balloons still gently bobbing in the corners. The drawing sat in a simple wooden frame now, placed on the mantel above the fireplace. Daniel stood with a photo of Dylan in one hand and Fiona's drawing in the other. He looked between them, his son and his second chance. "I hope you're watching, son," he said softly. "I think I did something right this time." He rested Dylan's photo back in its place and, without overthinking it, placed the drawing beside it. Equal space. Equal love. Equal home. Then he turned out the light and walked upstairs, where two children now slept in rooms that finally felt theirs, and where he, at last, had someone to come home to. What did you think of Daniel, Fiona, and Noah's journey? Did it resonate with you? This story reminded me that family isn't just about blood, but about who shows up, stays, and loves without condition. I'd love to hear what moments touched you most, and what lessons about love, healing, or second chances stayed with you after watching.